Hi everyone, my name's Kendall and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a returning viewer. This time what I have for you is a little bit different. I have gone out with another quilty friend of mine, Molli Sparkles, for his Lava LampAlong. Say that 3 times real fast. What we're doing in this little tutorial is showing you how to paper piece the lava lamps for the quilt you see on the wall behind me here. As you can see, I chose to only make 9 lava lamps, and I added some applique embellishments with the flowers and the lettering. For the flowers, I found an image that I liked and thought I teamed with the theme from online and made that work to a size that I was after. The text itself, I just found a font that I thought looked rather psychedelic and funky and printed those to the appropriate size and made those for the applique also. I have got a couple of links in the description box below on that flower image and the font or the text that I used and the size for you to download if you want to do the same. My border strips are 5 inches, and so I did the text to fit into that size. Anyway, without much further ado, let's get on to some foundation paper piecing. Come with me and I'll show you how I do it. I forgot to mention in my intro, folks, that the pattern for these lava lamps can be purchased from Molli's website, which I have linked to in the description below. It is very cheap, $6 Australian, I believe, and you can make as many lava lamps as you like. Anyway, on with the tutorial. What I've got here on the table in front of me is all of the pattern pieces trimmed to just outside the actual solid line that is on the paper pieces. I've got a 1x12 inch Creative Grids ruler. I've got a metal rule, and that helps me fold the papers back. I've got my adder quarter there, and I'll show you later how we use that. And a rotary blade for trimming down once we get to that point as well. Where I'm going to start is with the wallpaper fabric and one piece of the table or sideboard that the lava lamp is sitting on. As these are big solid pieces, I just use a washable glue stick. In Australia we have a product called Blue Stick. It's the same as your Elmer's or anything. Just put a very light dab because we're not wanting to stick this. It is peelable once it dries and will wash out once you're done. But for all our large pieces, we'll just lay them on our fabric. If you are using stripes or patterns that you need to match up, care will need to be taken at this point. So I'll just get all of these stuck down and I will see you when that's done. Okay, that's all the large pieces for our wallpaper stuck down to our fabric, just with a light tack so that we can trim around the outsides of these and the pattern won't shift and our pieces will be perfect. Now we just grab our ruler. It can be any ruler. In my instance, I have the 12 inches by 1 inch by Creative Grids, but you could use your 6.5 by 12.5. You could use a stick from the bush if that's what tickled your fancy, but you do need to have a 1/4 inch mark on that ruler. Now we'll line up that 1/4 inch mark from the ruler on the dotted line of the pattern and trim these down to their required size. I do this rather than leaving it whole and scrappy, and the reason why will be revealed when we get to that further into the video. So I'll just do this for all of my wallpaper pieces and one large piece of the sideboard / table fabric, and I'll meet you back at that point. Groove out to the tunes. Okay, with all of our large pieces out of the way, I'm going to grab this piece now, piece F, and what I actually did for this was reverse the order of these numbers, and that's so when we come to piece this together, our seam allowances will already be going in opposing directions. For this, we need the main color of our lamp, our shadows or highlight, and then a third piece of that main color for the lamp. I'm just going to line this up, making sure that all of the F1 area is fully covered by the fabric, which in my instance, I have such a large piece, it is. I'm then going to use the metal rule that I had just to fold this paper back. At this stage, I am going to grab the add a quarter ruler that I talked about before, and now this ruler has a little lip on it that catches the edge of your paper and allows you to trim a perfect 1/4 inch. If you don't have one, you can just find the 1/4 inch line on your ruler like I'm showing you here, line that up against the edge of the fold and slice the excess fabric away. You will notice with the foundation paper piecing that we are working backwards, and the final result is actually a mirror image of our printed pattern pieces. We now need to grab our second piece of fabric and line up that seam allowance, making sure that the second piece of fabric is also covered by all of the areas that it needs to fill in once we've sewn this on. We then take that to our machine, and with a stitch length of 1.5, which makes removing the paper later a lot easier, we simply stitch straight along the line in between our F1 and our F2 pieces on the pattern. We take that back over to our cutting mat, and you can do one of two things at this point. You can use a seam roller to just press this out of the way and back over where it needs to be. And using the seam roller is more of a thing if you are doing many tiny pieces and you don't want the heat of the iron continuously being on there to scorch the fabric. It will eventually damage the fabric, so a seam roller is a good idea in that instance. As you can see, I just chose to use my iron. We now identify our next piece, which in this, there's only the 3, so F3. We fold that back, and this time I am going to grab my add a quarter ruler and show you it does butt up against that folded paper, and then you just simply slice that off. We now once again add our third piece of fabric, so we'll line that up on the edge, making sure that all of our paper piece pattern, say that 5 times fast, is covered by the fabric that we're adding to it. We once again take that to our machine and stitch along that line. We'll now press that into place, and we will, or I do, trim this down using the same method I did for our large wallpaper pieces by lining up my ruler on the 1/4 inch mark and slicing the fabric away. We'll set this piece aside and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so we have half of the base of our lava lamp now done and all our wallpapers already cut and set to the side. So now we're going to grab piece I, fabric pattern piece I, and this one has quite a few more pieces and is a little bit tricky in some places, and you have to remember where your fabric is going to be getting placed. So I'm going to grab the main color for my lava lamp base and put that with I1 on the top there, as you can see, and making sure that all of my pattern piece is covered by the fabric underneath. Once again, we are working backwards with paper piecing. You would have already seen me put a little dab of glue on there to make sure it doesn't shift, and we can peel that off later. We then once again just need to place a fold in our paper between pieces 1 and 2. We know that 2 is our highlight fabric. In my case, that's the light pink. In comes the add a quarter ruler again to slice off that excess. We'll now line up a piece of our highlight fabric, and this is where it can be a bit tricky to make sure that all of the pattern piece is covered by the fabric. If you have a light box, that can help. Otherwise, hold it up to a window When you're happy with the placement of your fabric, take it over to your machine, and once again, with our stitch length of 1.5, we will stitch this line. Now, we are starting in the middle of nowhere and not on an edge, and it's best to try and get that as close as possible. It doesn't matter if you don't, you can still peel the paper back later. But I also like to do a back stitch at that point, just so that I know it is nice and secure, and when I do rip the paper, it's not going to take out those seams. With that second piece of fabric now added, we just wash, rinse, repeat for this process. Press this fabric back, find our next fold in between piece 2 and 3, and repeat those steps. For pieces 4 and 5, they are the background or the table fabric, for lack of a better term, and they are quite tiny, but it is still very achievable. So watch along and I'll show you how we do those after we add this last piece of main fabric. With pieces 1, 2 and 3 sewn onto our foundation, it is time to move on to 4 and 5, and that just makes sense because that's how numbers work. We just will fold this back the same way that we have for all of our other pieces and trim it off the same, and we just need to add a larger piece of fabric. For this one, because it does go off the edge, I do sew in from the edge following my fold down to the end where I backstitch. On I5, we just need to backstitch on either end of that. Being careful not to get too bulky where all of the pieces are going to intersect between I3, I5 and I6. But if you have a 40 weight thread and the 1.5 stitch length set or a very low stitch length, you should be fine. Take note and remember that these pieces 4, 5, 6 and 7 moving forward are all from your table fabric. So in my case, that's this lime green gorgeousness that I have here. These are smaller pieces, but not to be afraid of. Just line them up the same, stitch them on, and then we will trim across the bottom, do 6 and then 7. See you then. We're now ready to attach I7, which is the other large piece of our table or sideboard or coffee table, wherever your lava lamp is sitting. And you'll see there that I just trimmed around, and I'm going to trim the bottom off here where we just added I6 on the actual cutting line. And hopefully I'll have a big enough piece of fabric to cover I7. I can tell you from looking at that I do not, but you'll see in a moment that I do give it my best shot. and I fail miserably. There is enough to cover, as you can see there, but where that little divot comes in, it doesn't allow enough for my seam allowance and everything. And it is important to make sure that the fabric underneath is covering the entirety of the piece you're wanting it to cover. So this clearly isn't going to work. I play around with the fabric for a little while trying to make it work. It just isn't going to. So I pull in the rest of the fat quarter that I have of that fabric. I make sure that I'm going to have all the pieces covered. I cut the piece out, and then we will attach that in the same way that we have all of our other pieces, and then we will trim all this down by placing our 1/4 inch on the dotted line and moving on to the next piece. Now that we've got the base of the lava lamp done, I'm just pulling back over our F piece that we did earlier to show you that our seam allowances are indeed going in opposite directions, and these two little seams here will nest nicely once we come to actually sew these two pieces together. It's a little bit of planning ahead whenever you're doing foundation paper piecing. One, you need to know which fabric goes where, which way your seam allowances are going, do you care, etc. We're now going to grab the fabric that makes up the body of our lamp and foundation piece E, and just piece that the same way that we have on everything else. We won't go through the whole process for this one, but when we do the top of the lamp, there's just one more point to make, and then we can move on to actually sewing all the pieces together. Hopefully you didn't get bored or dizzy during all of that fast forwarding. We've come to the point now where we're doing the top of the lava lamp, so of course we need to use the fabric from the body of the lamp and that highlight fabric that we used before, which you could have seen throughout the footage. When we're coming to do B4, which is this little top part of the B foundation paper, it is actually the wallpaper fabric. So it's whatever fabric you had on those two large pieces A and C is the fabric that you need to use for this little part B4 at the top of the lava lamp. Of course, then moving on to B6 is just the same fabric that we used for the body of our lava lamp, which in my case is that lovely pink even, floral. So just pay special attention when you come to B4 that it is indeed the same fabric that you are using for foundation papers A and C. You should now have all of your foundation paper pieces covered with fabric and ready to assemble the block. In the pattern that Molly has lovingly put together for us, he has the sheet there showing you where to lay each and every piece out. Now, with the traditional paper piece method, you would leave the papers on still at this point. You would line your pieces up, making sure that your seam allowances match, and do the exact same thing by putting it under your needle and stitching on the solid line with the reduced stitch length. Once again, the reduced stitch length allows us to rip the paper out more easily once everything is sewn together. Because I trimmed to such an exact 1/4 inch, I actually take the paper off first, and I trust that my machine is going to have that correct measurement. So I remove the papers first, and I now go ahead and piece this in a more traditional style. To remove the papers, just simply fold them back in the opposite direction and then peel them off, and it comes off like any perforation, tear along the dotted line. So we are going to attach our little E piece here to the F piece. We'll then sew on D and G on either side of that. We'll then add our H piece to our I piece, and then our A and C to our B piece. With all of these, we will press just in a direction that makes sense. So in most instances, I'm pressing out towards the more solid piece of fabric. So the background pieces, in this case, the wallpaper and the table. When we do come to actually then join these 3 pieces together to create the final block, I will flip a couple of the seam allowances to help them nest a little bit, and then the final 2 seams I do press open. As you would have seen there, folks, I do chain piece all that I can through all at once there, and we'll now just pull those out. And as I said, we'll press out towards the more solid pieces of fabric, so away from the parts that are bulky. You will notice that I did put the little F and E pieces, when we sewn that together, underneath my clappers, and that is just because the E part being such a tiny piece, it was prone to not sitting completely flat. Now, when we came to put that into the final block, that wouldn't have really mattered, but it's good to bring in the tools that you have, such as your clappers, to help you out along the way, and you'll see now that that is sitting nice and perfectly flat and ready for me to add our D and G side pieces here. When it comes to joining these two pieces together, so the middle section and the bottom section, you'll notice that our seam allowances will sort of nest. So what I do is I clip into, but not through the stitching line, just in that little seam allowance, and I will move that seam allowance in the opposite direction, and that way I can feel for where that seam will come as close as possible to being perfect when I'm sewing the horizontal seam. Once I've sewn this horizontal seam, I will do the same to the top section of our block. And as I said before, both of these seams, once these horizontal stitching has been done, will be pressed open. Again, because of how we change the order in how we put together our F piece, those two little seams in the center here will also nest quite nicely, and everything will line up beautifully. Bob is most definitely your mother's brother. And just like that, easy peasy lemon squeezy, we have our lava lamp. I didn't quite get that little piece there lined up as perfectly as I'd like, but meh, what you gonna do? Okay folks, that's it. That's how I paper piece. As with anything in quilting, there's as many different ways to do something as there are quilters, and I'm sure that you're already aware of that. This is just the method that I find works best for me. It may not work for you, but hopefully from showing you in this tutorial, you've maybe learned something or picked up a few tips, tricks, and hints. If you are new to my channel, I would really love if you subscribe. I generally do block tutorials for sew-alongs that are hosted by Pat Sloan, but occasionally I do throw in an extra little video, just as you're seeing today. As always, folks, thanks for watching. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.